Let's crack open a beer and share some thoughts.
Welcome to this Hopinions special where we're looking into the past and exploring the rebirth of Allsopp's beers. But Martin, we're not doing this journey alone, are we?
Oh, definitely not, Steve. We are very fortunate to have Jamie Allsopp and Pete Brown joining us today. Jamie, perhaps you'd like to say a bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Martin. Hi, Steve. My name is Jamie Allsopp. I'm a member of the Allsopp family. I used to brew in Burton. And over the last few years, I've gathered the scattered trademarks of Samuel Allsopp and Sons, found an Allsopp's brewing ledger, obviously read Pete's books, and worked with a great team of people to bring Allsopp's beer back to life.
Thank you very much. And Pete, a little bit about how you're involved with Allsopp's.
Yep, so I'm Pete Brown. I'm a beer writer, have been for quite a long time now. In 2007, I wrote a book called Hops and Glory, where I recreated the journey of India Pale Ale, and also dug really deep into the history of Allsopp's and became a little bit obsessed. So we'll talk a little bit later about how I and Jamie actually met, but Jamie had a particular interest in talking to me about getting his trademarks back and relaunching the family business.
It's a pleasure to have you both here. And, luckily we will be sampling a couple of the beers as well as we go along.
Yes, we will, because Allsopp's have just recently launched the two new beers. We call them new, but maybe not quite so new as you think, to market. One of them being the Pale Ale, the other one being the India Pale Ale, and we're lucky enough to be trying them both tonight. I've got the Pale Ale in the glass, as I believe we all have. So should we just raise a little glass and have a little cheers and just have a bit of a taste to start off with? Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, Jamie, do you want to tell us a little bit about the beer before we give some tasting notes on it, maybe?
Well, the beer is as close as we could get to the old Allsopp's Pale Ale that is in the ledger. And what we did is we gave the the ledger story in itself is quite interesting, but we found an existing ledger which we think is the only ledger in existence of the old Allsopp's recipes, and reinterpreted them. The Pale Ale's got Maris Otter, Extra Pale, bit of Caragold and Chevalier malt. The hops are the traditional hops of Fuggles, but we used a bit of Cascade and Aurora in there. And the mandate was to create a sort of very drinkable, sessionable, bright, crisp Pale Ale that in bottle is 4.4% and in cask is 4%.
Okay, so a very distinctive difference in the ABVs there. Obviously, aware that the drinker in a pub is looking for a session beer that's just sits around that 4% mark, and they're more likely to go for that than they are anything slightly higher. Exactly
that. Yeah.
If you look at a lot of the great cask ales, quite often they're higher in bottle. Particularly if they're not bottle conditioned, they're quite a bit higher in bottle than they are on cask, because cask gives it that extra layer of depth and complexity that you can't replicate in a bottle. So it helps to nudge the ABV in bottle up a little bit to replicate what you get on the bar. Also, people prefer a little bit stronger when they're drinking at home compared to in the pub.
What do you think of the beer, Steve, in your first thoughts?
Exactly the same as you. It's got all of the characteristics that you'd look for in a cask beer. It's got a little bit of caramel in there. It's quite sweet, malty flavors. A little bit of citrus on the finish, and really light, easy bitterness on the finish as well. That's got that sort of bitter finish that makes you instantly want to dive back in for another sip, which is a sign of a really good sessionable beer, isn't it? Is that you want to drink more of it the minute you finished your sip.
Yeah, and I imagine that's what that Jamie was aiming for. So it's definitely got a very British pale ale feel to it. It's not trying to be an American pale ale. It's not trying to be anything too modern and fancy. It does feel like it's got everything you want in it, like I said, to be that sessionable cask beer. I mean, it's a pale ale, but it's very much on the more orangey amber sort of profile and colour as well. And like I said, sit a pint of that on the bar in front of the Allsopp hand pull would, I think, look quite or very attractive, actually. So, initial thoughts are that's definitely hitting the mark of what you're aiming for, I'd imagine.
Great. Yeah. Well, we got Jim Appleby to have a look at the recipes, and Jim was ex Bass and Molson, and originally was interestingly the William Worthington's brewery in Burton. And when I looked into that, Worthington's started brewing in 1744, which was 2 years after Allsopp's. So if anyone was going to interpret the ledger in order to get a great pale ale out of the ledger, it was Jim, and I'm absolutely delighted with his recipes to date.
So he's designed these recipes based on what you said in your introduction is the only, what you believe to be the only remaining ledger from the original Allsopp's brewery.
I think so, because the Allsopp's family, we don't have any ledgers. They kind of got misplaced, and apparently there was a flood and a fire, and then the old breweries got cleared out, and we spent a lot of time looking for these ledgers. And Pete's got a great story of going to the archives, so I'll let him tell. But we in the beginning of lockdown, we sort of searched high and low for a ledger, and had lots of dead ends. And eventually we found one beginning of 2020 in Leeds, which was, I believe, is the only one of its type left. So it's sort of like, to me, it's kind of Gutenberg Bible. It's like this precious book that we've got 250 recipes in it. So there's a good pipeline to go, and it's got the whole range of old Allsopp's beers in it. So there's a lot of work to do. I'm delighted to have it.
Have you photographed each page just in case it goes missing again?
I've stored it in various different places, yeah. on computer, it's like on the cloud. So yeah, if I have a fire or flood, we've got backups now.
Yeah, because that would be gutting, wouldn't it, after all that hard work finding it?
Yeah, it did blow.
But
yeah.
What's this story then, Pete?
So when I was writing Hops and Glory, I spent quite a lot of time in the archives at the National Brewery Museum in Burton-on-Trent. And the way that works is they've got file boxes, and they don't necessarily know what's in each box, but someone's just kind of sorted it into boxes. I think they've done a lot more work on it now, so you can really, they've got an online database now where you can search the archives fairly closely. But when I did it, it was like, no, there's various boxes of Allsopp's documents. And one of the main books I've got on my shelf that any beer writer in the UK needs is a book by a guy called Peter Mathias, who was a history professor at Cambridge in like the 50s through to the 70s. And he wrote this definitive book, The History of the British Brewing Industry, up to 1730 to 1830, 1700 to 1830. That's his book. It's a big old tome like this. And I found this box. I was going through the records. It's folder number ABC 157/C, Allsopp's Brewing Records. And I'm like, yes, I found it. I found a recipe that we can recreate the original Allsopp's IPA from. And I spent 2 hours looking for this box in the archives. And I found the box, and I thought, this feels a bit light for a whole bunch of brewing ledgers. And I opened the box, and there was a sheet of blue notepaper in the bottom. And it said, thank you so much for the loan of the Allsopp's Brewing Ledgers. I promise I'll return them as soon as I've finished with them. Peter Mathias, Cambridge University, 1969.
Oh my God, no way.
It was just like, oh, Peter Mathias, you bastard. Where are those damn legends? Then he passed away about 5 years ago. So there might be an office in Cambridge, then Cambridge University, an archive in Cambridge University somewhere, Jamie, with these old books that no one knows what they are or what they're doing there.
Sort of almost that moment when you open the box and there's a shine of a light coming from it, where you've almost got that moment and then it just disappears.
That's it. Because at the time I was looking to recreate an authentic 1820s IPA to take with me to India. And in the end, we had to go somewhat later than that. We got a late 19th century one.
And that's all documented in your book, isn't it? The journey of you and that beer.
Absolutely, yeah. And the many adventures that befell us. It really was the furthest from sanity that I've ever pushed beer writing. Really, you found myself in several situations where I thought this is not what I imagined. Having two Iranian guards holding AK-47s pointing at my chest when I knew that I was in an Iranian port without the right documentation to be there was probably one of the most nerve-wracking moments of the whole thing.
Going back to the recipe and the heritage, and presumably Jim was trying to get as close to the recipes as per the ledger, and we know that obviously nature and things have changed since those brews would have been done the first time round. And I noticed that you mentioned Chevalier, and I know that me and Steve have had a few heritage beers in the past where Chevalier malt has been used, especially. And presumably that's the same. So that's the pale ale. You've been tried to do the same with the India pale ale, but we'll try soon as well, about trying to recreate as closely as possible the recipe. Still, is that the ethos of what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And you picked out Chevalier correctly. Like that's been the problem malt to use. So we've had to dial back the percentage of Chevalier because of, I think sort of, future-proofing the brew, that we won't have to change it in the future. So we have dialed down the percentage, not dramatically, but, we have dialed that back a little bit. And the other interesting part of the recipe design was the yeast. So we found in the National Collection of Yeast Cultures the old Allsopp's yeast, which was amazing. I mean, I really didn't expect to find that. And we rang them up and got a sort of science fiction package of the yeast propagated, and sort of it's come out of like 0 degrees cold storage, and we started experimenting with it at the beginning. It's incredibly expensive to get yeast out of cold storage, so we had to dial that back a little bit as well. But we have plans to use that in the special editions that we're going to introduce over the coming years. But just to have the chance to use that is I think it's really special. Really really looking forward to that. The hops, the Belgian Fuggles was a little difficult, so we've had to sort of change it to Fuggles. But essentially we've used pretty much the same ingredients as within the ledger, and it was extraordinary how many kind of different ingredients and how the ingredients actually changed from brew to brew sometimes across the whole ledger. There's 200, as I mentioned, there's 250 brews in it, so there was a little bit of flexibility built in to the way that they did it.
Which I suppose is the same now as it was then. I mean, brewers have often spoken about that, it does change from one year to the next. The harvests change as well. They then have to maybe do a bit of a balancing act between, say, one hop and another hop to try and still get, as you say, get the beer as close to it is every time you brew it. So, we find these things out, and, it turns out that not many things are actually new anyway these days.
There's an extra difficulty with trying to recreate historic recipes. As I learned to my cost, the first time I tried to recreate a historic IPA recipe, I found a recipe from the India office that they used, mandating that both IPA and porter that they wanted brewed for the troops in India. It's like, you've got to deliver this many barrels to this ship, moored at this place in the Thames on the 18th of this month, and that kind of thing. And they lay out every single aspect of the beer to the width of the bungholes on the barrels. It's so precise, which is a bit of a gift if you want to kind of recreate the beer. And it was something ridiculous, like 2 pounds of hops per barrel. And so we followed the recipe. I was doing this with Everard's. So we followed the recipe faithfully and put 2 pounds of hops per barrel into it and stuff. The beer came out green, and it blocked the filters. It nearly knackered the entire mash tun. When we tasted it, it was completely undrinkable. It was just bitter off the scale. And we eventually had to brew another batch of the same beer with no hops at all, then blend the two, and it was still one of the hoppiest beers you've ever tasted. What I know now is that in 1870, when that recipe was written, these hops had about 3% alpha acid. And today, the same hops would have about somewhere between 13 and 18% alpha acid. So in order to get the same beer, you have to use a fraction of the hops or even a completely different variety of hop in order to get the same result, because hops have just evolved so much over the last 150 years.
That's quite fascinating there, because they're just telling you literally what it was in the weight, the type of hop and the weight, but that hop is no longer essentially the same hop, is it?
No, you can't. You can't brew. It's physically impossible to brew a faithful beer to an old recipe like that, because the ingredients and the nature of the ingredients has changed. It's been selectively bred to be more efficient, to give higher yields, because that's what happens with all crop farming. You know, all the time you're trying to get wheat that gives you more kernels, and you're trying to get barley that gives you a higher yield and stuff like that. So over 150 years, it changes beyond recognition.
It's not something I would have ever thought about. But then me and Steve don't do the sciencey bits on here. That's why we have people like your good selves.
Well, I was working with a really, really talented brewer, and he hadn't thought about it either until I knackered his brewery.
Have you been allowed back to play since?
Yes.
Only after extensive cleaning duties, AP.
How do people get hold of these beers? You know, we're talking about one of them. We'll talk about another one. We mentioned they're on cask. How far and wide are you going to be able to get these beers out in bottle and on cask?
Well, Martin, the website is going live as we speak, so that's exciting. So there's an avenue to buy it directly through the website. It's on Best of British Beers as well, and it will be going into a select range of pubs around Burton initially, and building up slowly through distribution across the country. I mean, the Allsopp family had it for about 200 years. And then Untitled had it for, and Allied had it for about 50. When we launched the pre-order page last week so that people could pre-order their beers, we put a 95% discount on the beers through a glitch in the website. So I thought I was going to have it for about half an hour. But now we've sorted that glitch out. We've got the beers will be, and it's literally, we are just at the beginning. So it's I'm concentrating on, consistency of beer, consistency of delivery. So it'll be a slow sort of rollout into pubs. I mean, hopefully we sell sort of 80% of the beer through the pubs, is my aim. We spent the last 2 years in recipe designs. We've taken it really, really slowly so far. We've brewed a dozen times to get the recipes right. So, I really don't want to ever sell a bad cask, a bad bottle. So we're taking it, slowly at the beginning.
And is there a Allsopp's brewery at the moment, or are you contract brewing these beers initially with a long-term view to reopening a brewery?
We are brewing at a brewery, but we haven't got we're obviously brewing at a brewery. We haven't got a traditional contract arrangement. We've got a partnership agreement with Mark Simonite at the Dead Parrot Brewery in Sheffield, and he's brewing just Allsops at the moment. Actually, the tap room opens this week. It's in Sheffield, a great place to go. It'll be 2 lines of Allsops will be on sale there. The beers will be on sale at the Dead Parrot Brewery, and then eventually we would like to go to back to Burton eventually, but couldn't find a suitable home for us at the moment. So the Dead Parrot is where we're brewing both beers right now.
But that must obviously be quite important to the heritage of the beers as well. Ultimately, being the goal being to get back to Burton and to start recreating the beers where they were first created and originally brewed.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the launch, we're going to launch. We're going to launch in a pub in Burton. And I think, being the spiritual home of Allsops, it's really important that we start there and as the centre, and then branch out around there in the old Allsopp pub estate, which was, based in Burton. So it means a lot to me that, Burton is the sort of epicentre, and we branch out from there.
And you said in your introduction, Jamie, that obviously you are an Allsopp, so you do have family lineage back to the original brewers. Tell us just a little bit about your family history then. How far back does that actually go?
Well, Samuel Allsopp is my 7th times grandfather, and Benjamin Wilson, who bought the Blue Stoops in 1742, Obviously my eighth times grandfather, and there's a sort of wonderful cast of Allsopps who have been some successful, some not so successful. You know, there's been sort of some great successes and some failures along the journey, and Allsopps has a wonderful story arc of you know, starting at Blue Stoops, and then, you know, in 1742 and 1806 Napoleonic blockade, but in that period up to then selling an awful lot of pale ale into the Baltic states, and this wonderful story about Catherine the Great and Peter drinking bumpers of Allsopps at their sort of imperial banquets, and Allsopps sort of taking that journey to sell through Hamburg, going into the Baltic states to sort of open up new trade lines, which, you know, apparently it was a perilous journey. And then, you know, through to obviously Samuel, who in 1822, with his maltster, brewed the first Burton IPA in a teapot, to Henry Allsopp, who expanded the business greatly, to Percy, who blew it all up spectacularly. So there's been some pretty interesting characters. I mean, I think it would make a great film one day. But
I mean, that's sort of like the official brewing. The Allsopps have been involved in brewing game even before that, haven't they? Because I mean, I read a few bits that, you know, you could almost trace your lineage and the brewing side of it back to the Crusades. Is that true?
I don't know about that. There was an Allsop brewer, and then there was the second reference in the sort of history books in 1663 in Samuel Pepys's diaries. There's the brewer to Charles II was called Allsopp. But I can't really find any evidence of that. But I'm not going to sort of say, no, it wasn't anything to do with us. It sounds great.
All adds to the story, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, yeah, it's in the blood. But no, it really started with Benjamin Wilson. And you know, and it's sort of quite typically idiosyncratic of Allsopps in that even the date of the origin date of Allsopp's brewery is sort of shrouded in mist, really, because on the title deeds it's 1742 when the brewery was bought, but in all the old memorabilia and all of us as Allsopps think it was 1730 because that's on all the advertising, sort of mirrors and jugs and everything that we've got. You know, it's Allsopps since 1730. It's been on everything. But when you look into it, it's actually 1742. And anyway, the first Allsopp was actually 1807. So there is sort of confusion. But Benjamin Wilson was Samuel Allsopp's grandfather, or father-in-law. So you know, it's an interesting story.
I mean, that still takes you back. I mean, that's still a fairly decent lineage and history. And so, talking about the one who sort of blew it all up, Percy, was this the reason why you ended up getting with I'm Coop? Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Was it due to him?
Yeah, I mean, we've got an expression when anyone's sort of, you know, going to spend a bit too much money, don't do a Percy. And what happened is they installed a huge amount of capacity in the 1860s up to 1880s, and you know, the sales are declining. There was a stock market debut, so as an IPO, and Samuel Allsopp, the second Samuel Allsopp, slightly over-egged it, and you know, overvalued the company. Percy then came on board as the chairman, and even though there was quite a lot of overcapacity, he went out to he traveled around Germany and America and invested in what was then the largest lager brewery in the UK, and installed this capacity. But no one really wanted to drink lager in those days. So even 50 years later, at the consensus of 1936, the Allsopp's lager capacity was about 50% of the demand in the UK, and no one really wanted to drink it. So it actually moved to Arrow's in Scotland, and then, you know, as an aside, went on to become Graham's Golden Lager, Graham's Lager, and then eventually became Skoll. So his blowing up of the kind of finances of Allsopp's put the company into receivership in 1911, and professional management came in. This chap called James Calder, from Arles actually, and in 1934 merged Allsopp's. You know, the story is that they just had to knock down a brick to merge it with Incoop, so a brick wall. So that's when the merger took place, and then the name got dropped in the Allsopp's name got dropped in 1959. So it's been an interesting story arc of the company.
So why choose to bring it back now? And what was the process that you went through? Because I think you mentioned again in the opening that you had to search for a number of different trademarks to be able to bring the beer back. Why 60, 70 odd years later, did you think that now was the right time to bring back the brand?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I've been thinking about it thinking about Allsopp's beer for most of my life. And I sent Pete an email in about 2018, I think it was, to say, can we have a chat about Allsopp's? I read the book and I saw he had a few trademarks, and went to go, and we met in his local and started chatting about it. And he'd actually done a few designs for the Allsopp bottle. And the more we discussed, we sort of realized that, the history of Allsopp's and what we thought the quality of the beers of Allsopp were too good to be consigned to the history books. So we set about bringing it back to life. And the first thing was Pete sort of lent me the trademarks that he had. And from those, we found out that Carlsberg had one part, because obviously Incoop allied Carlsberg, and they had some trademarks and were, incredibly nice and professional in giving me the trademarks back. And they said that, they continue to say, we want to carry on a conversation with you if you get it up and running, and we're really fantastic about it. And then I looked at where the most important trademark was, the Red Hand, and, how I was going to get that. Problem was with the Red Hand is that Carlsberg had lost it about 3 months before. And it was, and Brewdog owned it. And so, I sort of tried to find out what their plans were, and found out they'd actually done a design for a can, mentioned it in one of the Brewdog sort of like press releases and sort of mini festivals that they do, and or press days. And so I thought, well, this could be, pretty problematic, and so the project dies here. But in fact, Brewdog, after a bit of negotiation, were really good as well, very professional. And, we found the right price, and I managed to buy it back off them. And, and they were great, to be honest with you, about this. So I was really pleased to have the whole suite of trademarks back. Then we went on to sort of trademark some of the other Allsopp's names that I think the legal term was retired or something like that had died. And we got those back. So we now have the whole suite. And the ledger, and a great place to brew it all. So, and a full pipeline of recipes to get stuck into,
and an Allsopp.
Yeah, the most important thing that none of those other things had.
We found an Allsopp. Yeah,
Pete, you said earlier on that you became obsessed,
yes,
to a certain degree with Allsopp's, to the point of buying some of the trademarks.
So I was working, when the book came out, I was doing some freelance work with a design agency. And I said, you know what? It's a travesty that Allsopp's beer isn't around anymore. It's ridiculous. IPA at that point, well, still is, isn't it? But IPA, the most successful craft beer style in the world. And the first Burton IPA was nowhere to be seen. And Bass, AB InBev have completely screwed up what the Bass, and that wasn't there. And after doing this book, I lived for 3 years with these old Burton classic IPAs, and so Allsopp's was nowhere. Bass was in a toilet somewhere. Worthington was still going, but they were very Maltacos were very hesitant with how they marketed that. They weren't really sure what to do with it, even though it was a fantastic beer. And I said, damn it, I'm going to bring Allsopp's back. I'm going to relaunch Allsopp's. And so the guys in the design agency did some designs for me. I got these trademarks because they were lapsed. They hadn't been used. And so I had to pay some legal fees just to kind of take ownership of them. And so then I got some bottle designs. I got some trademarks. And then I think I got as far as looking for the first order, the minimum order for bottles that I would need. And it was like, right, that'll be 10,000 bottles and it's going to cost you X £1,000. And at that point, I remembered that I'm a writer, not an entrepreneur. And I had none of the skills to create a brewery from nothing and no money to invest. And just that I wasn't able to do it. So I just kind of had these trademarks and forgot about the whole thing really until Jamie phoned me up and said, you've got some of my trademarks. And so we met and had this chat, and I thought, fantastic, someone's going to do something with them, and it's an Allsopp and it's going to come back. So that's just brilliant.
So what input have you had into the recipe development, Pete? Has it been just your expertise of the work that you've been involved in and understanding what went into historical brews?
Yeah, I must confess, compared to some beer historians you might speak to, I was less interested in the authenticity of the recipes and more interested. I had a very clear idea how, to the extent that I had any influence, I had a very clear idea of what the beers should be tasting like. That the IPA should taste like an IPA would have tasted in the 1830s and 1840s in India. And that's not based on recipes. As we've already talked about, it's like, even if it was, you're not going to be able to recreate that recipe with modern ingredients. It was based on written descriptions and eyewitness accounts of what this beer tasted like in India. And it's like, can we make it taste like this person here is describing it? And that's what the IPA should be like. And then we were looking at the IPA and saying, well, it's going to be quite strong. It's not going to, if you're going to have this as your main flagship beer, you're not going to get people drinking huge volumes of it. So then we said, okay, it kind of needs to launch with the pale ale at the same time. And so that means that the pale ale has to be your volume player. So the pale ale, it was very clear. It's like the pale ale's got to be one of those, as you described it. I was so happy to hear you talk about it the way you did, because that was a brief. It was just like, you want someone to pick up a pint of this and go, oh my God, it's gone. Where did that go? I guess I'm going to need another one. And so that to be the session beer, the volume beer, so that, yeah, I mean, when I'm drinking Allsopps now at home, it's like 3 bottles of the pale ale and then 1 bottle of the IPA to finish, because that's the one, the IPA is the one that's demanding your attention and you're lingering over it. And we'll talk a bit more about it when we taste it, obviously, but I don't want to jump the gun on it. But yeah, so it was like kind of, I think this is how the beer should taste. And also just providing that thing where IPA now has turned into the opposite of what it was. And 10 years ago it was all about extreme bitterness. Now it's about no bitterness at all. And I felt very strongly that we should be creating some classic British beers. And I had a hunch just before lockdown, and I think it's turning out to be right, that the craft beer market is starting to go back to these more sensible, less showing off beers, these decent balanced beers. There's a lot of people now making ordinary bitters and best bitters, and I think this kind of amber coloured IPA, which 20 years ago this was the colour of IPA. That's, if you bought an IPA, it was this colour, and now it's just not. So just kind of getting back to this is the style that I fell in love with. This is what attracted me to beer, as more than just something to drink in the pub, but something to get involved in and write about. So I'm delighted it's turned out the way it has.
Well, I think you've absolutely nailed it, because I've definitely jumped the gun on this one. And
yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks for waiting.
I think it probably goes back to what Pete was saying there. That the pale ale is almost, you can almost say it's the original session pale ale, but session pale ales weren't a thing back then. They were just called pale ales, and it is just so drinkable. It's really easy to drink, and I can understand why Pete's doing a ratio of 3-1 when he's drinking them, because it's that easy to drink. So yeah, I just naturally moved on to the IPA and put it in a glass and started drinking it while you were talking.
That's really nice. The IPA. I've got nothing to add on the pale ale. The IPA is delicious, and straight away you can definitely get the balance in the beer. Again, yes, it's not sessionable in terms of strength at 5.6, the second beer, but in its sessionability in the taste and mouthfeel, again, it's got a great balance between, there are definitely some fruity notes presumably coming from some of the hops, and I'll let you tell us a bit more about what makes up this beer, Jamie. And it's got a beautiful colour, actually. It's got that sort of like orange amber hue to it. It's maybe a little bit darker than the pale ale. So there is a difference in that as well visually. But yeah, if this is what they were ending up with way back when, then it weren't a bad way to get your beer, was it? I mean, a long journey. Don't get me wrong, Pete. But the end result, and actually, I think that's really important. What you said there is about what was the beer like that people tasted, say 150 years ago. Let's recreate that. The recipe, as you say, you will have an understanding of it through the ledgers now. You have an understanding of what can go in it. We have the science to make some of the adjustments. But ultimately, you're trying to recreate the end result. It's not a science project. And the end result on the initial sips is rather tasty, actually.
It's delicious. Yeah.
So tell us a bit more about the actual makeup of this beer then, Jamie.
Well, yeah, thanks for that, Martin. Well, it is, you said it, the word that we really wanted was like balanced. So, we want the malt and the hops to combine and create a balance. It's got it's more complex. There's more malt, more hops and a higher ABV. It's darker and clearer than most modern IPAs. The malts are again Maris Otter and Chevalier, and the hops that we've used Bramling Cross and Fuggles. So we've kept and Challenger as well. So these were the hops that they used in the old recipe book. So with this one we've really kept pretty close to the old recipe. Admittedly, like it probably would have been a little bit stronger. So 6.5, maybe 7. I think the old IPA was that, possibly, but bringing it down to 5.6 in a bottle, 5% in cask.
It puts me in mind, and this is meant completely as a compliment, of Govinda from Cheshire Brew House, because I think partly because of Chevalier malt as well, but there is definitely a sort of an orange sort of feel to it, and it's got a lovely balanced bitterness at the end. It's bitter and dry, and again, it makes you want to come in for more, but it's definitely sucking a bit more of the moisture out of your mouth at the same time as well. I mean, that's what it's put me in mind of, and anyone who remembers our shows when we've had Govinda on before, me and Steve are both massive fans of that. And that does come in that bit higher. I mean, Govinda's 6 or 7, Steve?
Is it 5.9?
I think it's in the 6s, so it's a little bit stronger. So again, you've made the difference between the bottled version and the cask version as well. So the cask, you said, is at 5%, which you'll get that bit of uptick in the mouthfeel and the extra layers through the cask anyway. And presumably, if you're having it on tap in Sheffield, both of the pints have been served with sparklers anyway. So there's definitely going to be some added layers and lacing going on there.
For me, it's interesting that you talk about the hops in it there, and Bramling Cross always presents itself to me as being quite a kind of earthy fruitiness to it, and that's what I pick up on the tail end of this, and that then leads into that deliciously dry bitter finish that you get on it. And even at 5.6%, this is a little bit on the dangerously drinkable side of things. 5% on cask, you could be in trouble after a few of these, I think, because I don't think you'd realize what you were drinking.
No, it's been described as dangerously drinkable on the website, and that's a description that I'm particularly fond of for the IPA.
I don't blame you. It is. I mean, you say you've got a ledger with 200. Is it 250 different recipes, or is it variations on certain recipes?
No, you're quite right. It's small variations of 250, and in individual recipes, it's got all the old Allsopp's classics in it. But I haven't gone through and actually marked exactly the standalone recipes, but it's got all of them in there.
And obviously you started off by making I think you've sort of made the point more than once in different ways about you've been wanting to get the consistency, the quality for these two initial beers as part of the launch of it. But you did mention a pipeline. So in that pipeline, is there beers that you're definitely going to do, but is there any beers you'd love to do, but maybe haven't quite reached the pipeline stage? Is there any little gems in there?
very clever question to make me sort of say what we're going to, the special editions that I'm trying not to mention.
I was come on, give me credit for trying.
But I tell you what we're doing. We're launching the lager next year. Percy's lager, which is really exciting because again, that's got a fantastic story to it. And there's some old Allsopp's favourites, that of course we're working on and we'll be releasing. One thing that I should mention, but it's an interesting point, is next year is the 200th anniversary of the invention of Burton IPA. So there might be something coming out at some point next year using the old yeast and a high ABV and a really old-fashioned special edition Burton IPA. I don't know though, but I mean, it would make sense, wouldn't it?
I'm sure you do know, but you're just not at liberty to say just yet.
Well, is there going to be a Allsopp? Because obviously a lot of the history with Burton and with Allsopps is very much on the lighter beers. Even the lager would have been obviously the lighter style. Is there any dark beers that might come out at some point?
Eventually, definitely. Yeah, I'm really keen for the dark beers. And there's some fantastic designs and labels that have been done, old labels. We've done some preliminary work on the pipeline. So yeah, we're definitely going to release all sorts of best beers as time goes by.
So this is quite, it feels like you've got in your head, Jamie, it feels like a long term. So it's not, some people might think maybe it's a bit gimmicky. We'll just bring out these two beers. Here's the bottles. You can get it in cask with you. This feels like very much a long-term project plan for you.
It really is a long-term project. I want to bring Allsopp's back into sort of the centre of British family brewing, and there's a sort of community aspect to that as well. I'm in no rush. I don't want to, one bad pint is a nightmare. I want to do everything authentically, properly, and make the best beer that we possibly can do. And as I say, don't want to have another 95% discount moment. So we're all going to do it, we're going to do it slowly. The family motto is hasten slowly. And Samuel said that he would rather do a little amount of good business than a lot of bad business. And I really sort of want that to be sort of the ethos of Allsopp's.
It does sound good. And Pete, are you in this for the long term, given your obsession?
Yeah. Jamie was kind enough to give me a stake in the business in return for my trademarks and my advice. And I'm trying to be the brand. I'm going to be a pain in the ass, so Jamie doesn't have to be. In terms of being the stickler for historical accuracy and things like that, it's very tempting to say things like the return of the first ever IPA. It's like, no, it's not the first IPA, it's the first Burton IPA and things like that. So and I'm just so I'm not day-to-day involved, but I'm kind of an advisor on it. So unfortunately I'm not going to be able to write very much about it because I try not to cross my wires. Or if I do write about it, it's going to have a massive disclaimer across the top saying I have an interest in this company. Read into that what you will, but it's just it's great to see it from this side of the fence. I've done a lot of consultancy in the industry before, but this feels personal. And with the design, I had some old design contacts and I got them to do the designs and stuff. And I'm, God, delighted that worked out as well as it did because Jamie, you want to use these mates of mine. It's like, thank goodness it worked,
Silas and Alec, Silas Amos and Alec, are absolutely brilliant at the design. And they took the old, the racetrack design and gave it that sort of, modern feel, but kept the kind of the historic components like, brewed expressly from home consumption on the top of the racetrack. And then on the pump clip, it says brewed expressly for alehouse consumption. And then there's the Arctic ale brewed expressly for Arctic consumption. And all these little quirks of Allsopp's with essentially the red hand itself. It's a very, very quirky trademark to have that Allsopp's been using since sort of the 1850s or possibly earlier than that, maybe 1840s, late 1840s. Which looking through the old archives was, they used a hand on the side of an inn to signify that there was fresh beer within. So, I like to think that the Allsopp's hand is a sign of fresh beer, and that's why they used it. Probably they were just rushed into it because Bass had the red triangle and they needed to find something quickly. but the inn story is better.
It's very distinctive though, and you said that effectively the brewing had stopped by the late 1950s, but somehow that red hand seems familiar to me.
What? Yeah. Uncle kept it on. The Allied de Mech actually changed it into a gold hand, and then it got brought back. Well, the Samuel Allsopp Brewery Company actually dropped the hand completely, but it's the hand sort of it's on so much sort of brewing memorabilia, isn't it? That red hand that it does feel you see it around.
Well, this is it. So you can see that Ind Coop carried on using the hand symbol quite a long time after they dropped the Allsopp's name. So the trademark itself was still worth something to them, even when they didn't really want the name of their great previous rivals to be used before. So it carried on quite late. So I think certainly it was still around. Actually, Jamie, you correct me on this, but I seem to remember it. Well, the thing is also, it with pub memorabilia being the way it is, even after it was phased out commercially, you'd still see mirrors, pub mirrors, Breweriana, all ashtrays, all that kind of stuff with it on, yeah.
The branding on the bottles is striking, though, isn't it? As I think you said there, Martin, it really pops out. The colours really pop out, but it's in a way that you look at the branding and you can tell there's something historic about it, but it's also quite modern at the same time. There's a great balance there, and even down to like the little touches, like the feel of the label. It's got that kind of tactile feel to it. It's not a smooth label. You can tell you've thought about every part of what this beer is going to look like and also taste like.
Well, thanks. It took about 2 years to get that right. Well, not really. It took 2 years thinking about, because it was such a joy. We gave this huge amount of labels, historic, like going back, as I said, such a long period of time, and just sort of handed over this great big folder and said, "What do you think of all of this?" And, so they spent quite a lot of time sifting through it and just taking out the best components and putting it in. But we wanted a nod back to the past, but not to be sort of too old worldy kind of thing.
If only you'd had someone involved that had just spent a lot of time researching and writing a book about branding, that would have been really helpful, wouldn't it?
It just didn't quite work out for me in time to put this design into the book. But I spoke to Alec, who is a lettering artist who kind of led the design. I spoke to him about various other projects he's worked on for my Beer by Design book, now available through Camera Books. And it's fascinating listening to him. I mean, when he would, you have these Zoom, this was all during lockdown, you have these Zoom meetings. So Alec puts his presentation up on the screen and says, but before I show you the design, I just want to talk through my process about how I took the old lettering, retraced it, computerized it, made that into a new font, and the reasons behind these different things that I did. And you'd think something like that would be really boring. And he would talk for half an hour, and you're just absolutely fascinated by what he's done when he shows you the little tricks. Exactly how you said. It's like, it's meant to look old-fashioned, but it's also got modern ticks to it that you don't even notice unless you're, a lettering font aficionado. And the work he did he's done other projects in the industry, but he's phenomenal at what he does, and this is his passion, and that passion is really infectious, and it's there on these labels. It was a joy to see him do it. Actually,
it does come out. I think both you and Steve are right about how it looks. It somehow managed to, again, a bit like both the beers, it managed to strike a balance. And going back to the beer, I mean, I've almost finished my IPA. Steve's probably on a third drink already, for all I know tonight, given the pace he's going at. But the best beer, taking all of that aside, all the time it's been spent, the actual output, which is what we were talking about earlier, Pete, is really good. So, we were lucky enough that you sent us the beers in a lovely presentation box, some nice postcards, some nice pictures. Ultimately, it's got to be what comes out of the bottle. And, both of these beers, I so want to try these beers on cask. That for me is like almost a must now. It's on that must-do list. I haven't actually got much of the IPA left anyway. And I haven't got much else to add. It's superbly drinkable. And that dangerously drinkable phrase is very apt for it.
Right.
Any final thoughts for you, Steve, on the beer?
It's just really delicious, and as you say, it's very, very drinkable as well. And going back a little bit to what Pete was saying as well, it's so refreshing to drink an IPA that isn't trying to label itself as East Coast, West Coast, no coast. It's just a straight up India Pale Ale with really good ingredients and a lot of attention to detail in terms of what the output of it is. And yeah, I mean, long live the English IPA. I would say if this is what we're going to get, more of this now. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. And it has definitely got very much a English British feel to the beer. I think the ingredients you described, Jamie, in it. And I know that Bramling Cross is a couple of my homebrewer friends. They're massive fans of the Bramling Cross hop. It's definitely one of their favourites that they use a lot. And that fruity, earthy notes that Steve talked about, I think works perfectly in this beer. It's just, I said, it's the dryness at the end. It's just superb. Yeah. It's just got such a lovely feel to it. And I'm glad we took it out of the fridge a few minutes before we cracked it open. So it feels like I've got that initial cellar temperature coming up for room temperature now, and I'm getting everything I want from it.
As it stands right now, so you've only got the Pale Ale and the India Pale Ale. They're what you're launching with, and as you said, Jamie, they're now available on the website for purchase.
Yes, Steve, they're available on the website as of tonight, actually, and through Best of British Beer, we will be bringing them to independent bottle shops and to pubs, as soon as practically possible. But the website is the primary place to buy. Allsopps.com is the place to buy.
Great stuff. Well, we'll put a link in the show notes to where people can find and buy these beers and try them for themselves. We'll also put a link in the show notes to all of the Allsopp social media so people can follow what's going on with the beers and your continued journey to bring in the brand and the beers back to life. Pete will also put a link in for your many published work. We'll probably just put a link to your website and people can find them from there. To be honest with you, it has been great that you've both been able to give up some time to join us and chat to us about the Allsopp beers and what is, I think, certainly from my point of view, a very exciting, I want to call it a project, but I know that's not the right word, but it's very exciting in terms of what you're doing now and what's potentially to come in the future.
Thanks so much, Steve, for that. Yeah, it's I think it's a great team that we've got together through design, sales, strategy, and brewing, of course. And I'm looking forward to growing our offering and Allsopp over time.
Well, I feel like we're in at the start, not the start of the journey, given this started quite a while for at least one of you, if not both of you. But for me and for Steve and I think we'll keep our eye open for the future releases for sure, because based on these two, I'm very curious to see what comes next. So again, I can only echo what Steve said. So thank you very much for sharing both your time and the beers with us.
It's so great to see your reaction to them. It's really lovely.
Thanks, Martin. Thank you, Steve.
Brilliant. And hopefully some of our listeners will try the beers now and we'll get some feedback from our listeners as well that we'll be able to share with you. So good luck with everything. And hopefully we can maybe do a little bit of a revisit in 18 months, 2 years time to see how you've progressed.